This film, based on a true story, focuses on an Indian man named Najeeb Muhammad. Najeeb lived in a shabby house in a rural village with his mother and his pregnant wife, Sainu. In his village, Najeeb worked as a sand digger at a river not far from his home. One day, while working, Najeeb and his brother, Hakeem, heard about many people who had gone to work for companies in Saudi Arabia and earned a lot of money. Hoping to change their lives, Najeeb and Hakeem decided to follow in their footsteps. Najeeb was introduced to a labor agent who promised to find him a sponsor, a place to work, and handle his visa. However, the agent demanded a high fee. Determined to go, Najeeb mortgaged his house to raise the money. With hope in his heart, he gave all the money he had to the agent. Before leaving, Najeeb spent some precious moments with his wife. Saina hoped that Najeeb would earn enough money to build a decent home for their family. At the same time, they were both heartbroken at the thought of parting, especially with Sainu being pregnant. Najeeb made a heartfelt request. If their child were a boy, she should name him Nabil. Finally, the day arrived. Najeeb and Hakeem set out for the airport, traveling by train. Najeeb left his family behind, hoping for a better future. Before long, they arrived in Saudi Arabia. However, at immigration, they faced a major problem. They couldn't speak any foreign languages. The only word they knew was helper, indicating their purpose of coming as workers. They tried to communicate through gestures, but struggled further because neither of them spoke English. Luckily, the immigration officer eventually let them through. Once they left the airport, they tried contacting their agent, but the calls went unanswered. Regret sank in. They hadn't asked for the contact details of their sponsor or the person who was supposed to pick them up. Airport staff tried to help and assured them that their sponsor, known as the CAFL, would come to fetch them. Not long after, a middle-aged man with a stern and intimidating demeanor arrived. He seemed to be looking for someone, speaking in Arabic to Najeeb and Hakeem. Unfortunately, they couldn't understand a word. The man grew impatient and stormed inside, yelling angrily. He took Najeeb and Hakeem's visas and led them to his car. Due to the language barrier, there were constant misunderstandings, making the man increasingly irritable. After a long drive, the man stopped the car in the middle of a vast desert, far from any settlement. Najeeb, frustrated and scared, tried explaining in his native language that there must have been a mistake. They were promised jobs in the city, and he begged to be allowed to call his family. The man ignored him and ordered Najeeb to get back in the car. Najeeb and Hakeem were separated, and Najeeb was taken to a farm. Upon arrival, Najeeb, still confused and overwhelmed, was forced to enter the farm. There, he met an elderly shepherd who appeared disheveled and malnourished. Thankfully, the old man could communicate a little with Najeeb using gestures. Najeeb asked for water, and the man pointed to a tap, signaling that Najeeb should drink directly from it. Najeeb then asked where he could rest. The old man gestured that he could rest anywhere. Exhausted and defeated, Najeeb went to sleep in a tent inside the barn. That night, Najeeb dreamed of his wife, deepening his longing for home. But his dream was abruptly interrupted when the CAFL arrived and kicked him for sleeping in the wrong place. The next morning, Najeeb woke to find the old shepherd milking goats. Curious, Najeeb approached him. The shepherd asked Najeeb to deliver the milk to the CAFL. Not understanding, Najeeb drank the milk instead, prompting the shepherd to scold him. The shepherd poured more milk and gestured for Najeeb to deliver it. Najeeb used this opportunity to beg the CAFL for freedom, explaining that he wasn't supposed to be there. He mentioned that he had mortgaged his house to come. But the CAFL didn't understand and, growing irritated, kicked Najeeb into a herd of goats. Sometime later, the CAFL who had brought him to the farm arrived. Najeeb ran to him, pleading for help. Instead, the man ordered Najeeb to carry goods and scolded him for complaining. Najeeb tried showing his work visa, but the man grew furious and tore it apart. This broke Najeeb's spirit. Feeling helpless, he approached the old shepherd and asked for directions to the city. The shepherd explained, through gestures, that the city was very far, and no one knew exactly how far it was. The next morning, Najeeb tried washing himself with water, but the kafil kicked him for wasting such a precious resource. After the kafil left, Najeeb asked the shepherd how he could clean himself. The old man grabbed a handful of sand, signaling that this was the only way to clean up. One day, the shepherd disappeared. Najeeb was forced to take over his duties, including milking the goats. At first, he couldn't do it and was even kicked by the goats. Eventually, the kafil showed him the proper technique. During the day, Najeeb went out to the desert to herd the goats. However, the goats became aggressive, injuring him, and ran away. Seeing this, the kafil demanded that Najeeb retrieve the goats. But Najeeb, overwhelmed with pain and frustration, begged to be taken to a hospital. The kafil threatened him instead, holding up a whip. Time passed, and Najeeb caught a glimpse of himself in a car's side mirror. He barely recognized his reflection. His hair and beard were overgrown, and his appearance had drastically changed. He realized he had been at the farm for an extended period, but couldn't recall how much time had passed. His legs bore marks from the constant abuse he had endured. Desperate and hopeless, Najeeb ran to a cliff and contemplated his fate. But he stopped when he noticed vultures circling below. Curious, he looked down and saw vultures feasting on something. Curious about what the vultures were eating, Najeeb quickly descended to see for himself. What he discovered shocked him to his core. The vultures were feasting on the dried-up corpse of the old shepherd. That explained why Najeeb hadn't seen him again. Filled with sorrow and dread, Najeeb returned to the barn and wept over his fate. This harrowing discovery reignited his desire for freedom. He didn't want to end up like the shepherd. Without a second thought, Najeeb decided to escape. He made a run for it, attempting to flee the farm. But the kafil caught sight of him and chased after him on a camel, armed with a rifle. The kafil quickly closed the distance and fired his gun, forcing Najeeb to stop. Najeeb was captured again and dragged back to the barn, where he was tied up, his hopes of freedom seemingly extinguished. Resigned to his fate, Najeeb spent his days herding goats in the endless desert. Then one day, something unexpected happened. It started to rain. Najeeb and the goats sought shelter in a nearby cave. While waiting out the rain, Najeeb heard a sound from deeper inside the cave. Intrigued, he ventured in and followed the tunnel, which led him to the other side of the desert. As he emerged, Najeeb saw someone in the distance and, in desperation, tried to scare them off. But as the figure approached, Najeeb was stunned. It was his brother, Hakim. They had been separated for years, and their appearances had changed so drastically that at first, they didn't recognize each other. It was only their voices that finally confirmed their identities. However, their reunion was short-lived. Hakim's kafil soon arrived to collect him. In fear, Hakim urged Najeeb to return to that spot the next day. Najeeb agreed. The following day, Najeeb made his way back to the meeting point in the desert. Not long after, Hakim appeared, looking hurried and nervous. He left behind a letter before rushing off again. Najeeb grabbed the letter, but a sudden gust of wind blew it away. At the same time, Najeeb's kafil arrived and grew suspicious of him. Thinking quickly, Najeeb pretended to be relieving himself. Luckily, the kafil believed him and left. Najeeb retrieved the letter and read it. In the letter, Hakim explained that he had found a way for them to escape. He had befriended a man from Africa named Ibrahim, who knew the route back to freedom. Hakim believed that Ibrahim was sent by God to save them. The next day, Najeeb met with Hakim and Ibrahim. Ibrahim explained that escaping wouldn't be easy. The kafils were ruthless, and the area was far from any settlements. But there was good news. In a few days, one of the kafils was hosting his daughter's wedding. It would be the perfect opportunity to make their escape. Finally, the long-awaited day arrived. After ensuring that the kafil had left for the wedding, Najeeb seized the moment. He took off his filthy clothes and washed his body for the first time in years, relishing the feeling of water on his skin. He changed into the clothes he had worn when he first arrived. His pants hung loosely around his emaciated frame, a stark reminder of how much he had suffered. Before leaving, Najeeb bid farewell to the goats he had cared for. He gave them food and softly said, "I'm leaving and won't be coming back." As if understanding his words, the animals stopped eating and looked at him mournfully, as if they didn't want him to go. Soon after, Hakim and Ibrahim arrived. Najeeb grabbed his bag, and the three of them set off across the desert. The journey was grueling. They walked from day to night, battling exhaustion and thirst. Eventually, they spotted a farm in the distance. Desperate for water, they asked Ibrahim to fetch some. Initially, Ibrahim refused, fearing the farm's guards would mistake him for a thief. But with no other option, he reluctantly sneaked in to get water. Unfortunately, a guard caught him, shouting, "Thief!" The three of them had to flee, with the farm's guards hot on their heels. The next morning, they woke up in the middle of the desert. As the sun rose, they resumed their journey. Najeeb asked where they were headed, but the events of the previous night had thrown them off course. They were now lost in the vast desert. With no better option, they used the sun as their guide. As they trudged on, Hakim spotted what he thought was water in the distance and ran towards it. But it was just a mirage. What they actually found was a camel that had died of thirst. The sight terrified them, filling them with dread that they might share the same fate. At midday, they paused to perform the Zuhr prayer in the blistering heat of the desert. Right after the prayer, a strong wind suddenly swept through, and venomous desert snakes began emerging from the sand. Ibrahim urged Najeeb to stay completely still, warning that the snakes would strike if he moved. The next day, Najeeb's body gave out. His feet were swollen and blistered from walking barefoot. His shoes had been lost during their escape from the farm guards. Seeing Najeeb suffering, Ibrahim tore his shirt into strips and fashioned makeshift sandals for him. In this pitiful state, the three men pressed on. But all they could see, in every direction, was an endless sea of sand. They began to lose hope, realizing they might never reach their destination. To make matters worse, Hakim, who was utterly exhausted, suddenly collapsed and could no longer continue. Ibrahim, still strong enough to walk, decided to carry Hakim through the scorching desert. But not long after, Najeeb also fell and could no longer stand. Once again, Ibrahim sacrificed himself, tending to both of his friends. They continued their journey, pushing forward despite their dire circumstances. As they struggled through the heat, Najeeb began to hallucinate, imagining an oasis with a bustling city. Suddenly energized by the illusion, he sprinted toward what he believed was water. Without thinking, Hakim joined in, eating sand in desperation, mistaking it for water. The sharp grains tore at Hakim's throat, and he tragically succumbed to his injuries. But their ordeal was far from over. A violent sandstorm rolled in. Ibrahim quickly dragged Najeeb to safety, leaving Hakim's lifeless body behind. Despite their efforts to escape the storm, they were eventually engulfed. Moments later, the storm subsided, leaving only Ibrahim and Najeeb alive. Despair overwhelmed Najeeb. He refused to go any further, but Ibrahim encouraged him relentlessly, even giving Najeeb his shoes while he wrapped his own feet in torn cloth. Not long after, Ibrahim spotted a lizard, a sign that life might be nearby. They followed the lizard and, to their immense relief, discovered a water source in the middle of the desert. Najeeb, parched beyond imagination, rushed to drink as much as he could. But Ibrahim stopped him, cautioning him to drink slowly. He moistened Najeeb's lips first to ease his thirst gradually. Nearby, Ibrahim found a bottle. Emptying its contents, he blew into it, producing a melodious sound that lifted their spirits. Rejuvenated, they decided to continue their journey. Not far from the water source, they stumbled upon tire tracks, evidence that a vehicle had recently passed through. Following the tracks with renewed hope, they marched on. But abruptly, the tracks disappeared, and their hope turned to despair once again. Ibrahim, filled with guilt for promising to lead them to safety, felt like he had failed. The next morning, Najeeb awoke to find Ibrahim gone. All that remained was a bottle of water left behind for him. After drinking it, Najeeb suddenly heard the sound of a vehicle. Summoning the last of his strength, he ran toward the noise. He tripped and fell, sending the bottle rolling onto the road. Finally, after a grueling journey, Najeeb reached the road. But his suffering wasn't over. Najeeb tried to flag down passing vehicles, pleading for help. But not a single driver stopped. Instead, they yelled at him, possibly thinking he was mentally unstable. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, an Arab man driving by stopped and offered help. The man let Najeeb into his car and gave him water, reciting, Bismillah, Ya Allah. Unsure where to take Najeeb, the man decided to drop him off at a nearby mosque. At the mosque, Najeeb begged for help from the people there, but they ignored him. Eventually, he was taken to a social services center where he was cleaned up and his hair and beard were trimmed. The staff worked to uncover Najeeb's background. After some time, they managed to locate Najeeb's family in India and contacted them. It turned out that Najeeb's family had been searching for him all these years. His wife, in tears, revealed that their child had been born and named Nabil, just as Najeeb had requested before he left for the Middle East. However, before Najeeb could return home, he had to report to the police. At the police station, Najeeb noticed a photo of Ibrahim on the wall. It seemed Ibrahim was wanted by the authorities. Shortly after, Najeeb and other escaped workers were gathered into a room. Sponsors arrived to collect their runaway workers, and to Najeeb's horror, his kafil was among them. Memories of the kafil's cruelty filled Najeeb's mind, and he feared punishment. To his surprise, the kafil didn't harm him. Instead, the kafil appeared puzzled, wondering how Najeeb had managed to escape. Another man in the room clarified that this kafil wasn't Najeeb's actual sponsor. If he were, the kafil wouldn't have hesitated to drag Najeeb back to the farm. It was revealed that the kafil had mistakenly taken Najeeb and Hakim without proper documentation. This revelation was heartbreaking. Najeeb and Hakim had endured unimaginable suffering in the desert, all because they had been taken by the wrong person. Hakim had even lost his life because of it. After years of hardship, Najeeb was finally allowed to return home. As the film concludes, it leaves the audience with a vital lesson: the importance of learning a foreign language before working abroad. Najeeb's tragic ordeal could have been avoided if he had been able to communicate better. This cautionary tale serves as a powerful reminder of the consequences of miscommunication.